Hello, Lewis.
Hello, Daniel. How the hell are you?
Oh, I'm really excited about our guest this week. I'm pumped up.
Oh my God, this is big because he's the best at everything, isn't he? The podcasts, they're so good. The books are so good. The talks are so.
It's aggravating. It really is aggravating.
It is.
I don't know. It's like listening to or talking with. I guess in the future it'll be like a young podcaster talking to Mark Fennell.
Yeah. Yeah, it's huge. We've got Jon Ronson on the podcast, the author of things like the psychopath test, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, them. It's incredible. Just everything he does is so good, so interesting. Yeah. There's a sort of caliber of that kind of entertaining, funny journalist probers, the John Safrans, the Jon Ronsons, the Louis Therouxs. Yeah. They are in a really interesting class, and it's fascinating they're always great conversationalists.
Yeah, looking forward to our chat. And given the week in news, Lewis, I'm glad I don't have to talk about you-know-who or you-know-what.
I don't. Oh, are we talking about Alan Jones?
Yes. I'm just so grateful. I don't have to do an impression of Alan Jones this week.
Well,
we've got Jon Ronson.
It's a tough one, isn't it? Like, is this going to make your impression more or less valuable?
Well, I'm not going to do it anymore. Let's just put it that way. So when Kate McClymont's story came out about him last year, I was just like, you know what? It's time to put Alan Jones to bed. Not in that way, but I'm never going to touch Alan Jones again.
Again, not in that way?
Not in that way. Yeah.
This is like when I had that great impression of my that wobble board I used to do, and then I had to stop.
Also, people have been asking me a lot of questions about it. I'm not going to be doing it. So please stop sending me questions about Alan Jones.
You could release a sort of satirical album, sort of like like Alan Jones, like in the style of a sort of Johnny Cash from Folsom Prison. Alan Jones, live from Silverwater.
Well, this could be the case. I mean, I could put all the sketches we've ever made about Alan Jones in like a band camp and then give the proceeds to victims of his crimes. That could be a nice thing we do.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good though, does it? It doesn't feel right.
It doesn't feel right at all. I don't think anybody wins really in the amount of money that we could probably make from band camp.
Yeah.
Speaking of money, we are not going to be at the Australian Podcast Awards this week. People keep asking if we're going, but we're not because we didn't enter because it's so expensive and we hadn't been publishing when the awards deadline was due. But I am going to the Walkleys tonight, and by comparison, it's a $250 sit-down dinner, which is amazing. Black tie. There'll be drinks there as well. But the Australian Podcast Awards, they're $350. No sit-down dinner, canapes maybe. And if you want an extra trophy, it costs £400 to get an extra trophy if you win. I mean, and if you want an extra Walkley, you just take one of Kate McClymont's. She's got so many. You just steal one.
Yeah. Plus, last year I couldn't even get a drink. It was they're an expensive awards for a place that doesn't give a drink out.
That's right. We didn't get a drink because we won again for the fourth time, and we just went to the bar and paid for our own drinks because we were so amazed that we'd actually won again.
Yeah. But good luck to everyone. Lots of good people nominated. Obviously, The Chaser nominated again. Good luck to them.
And also the Buck Up, Nath Valver and Kate Lanebrook, also very, very funny people nominated for Best Comedy as well. Big guest this week. No more jokes. I'm recording my end of Irrational Fear on Gundagara and Tharrawa land. Let's start the show.
The following program contains rude words like Mark Latham, blockchain, and Twitter. Irrational Fear recommends listening by immature audiences. Comedians, experts, laughing at the world as it burns down around us. This is a Rational Fear.
Welcome to Irrational Fear. I'm your host, former Alan Jones impressionist, Dan Illich. And this week, Lewis and I are joined by someone who's been in our ears and inside our eyes and, dare I say, infested our brains for decades, hanging out with folks on the fringes of society, finding out how things actually work in a world that we take for granted, and generally sorting through the mess of society and tugging on threads and seeing which ones pull out to the longest yarns. At Irrational Fear, we're very excited to be joined by one of our favourite storytellers, authors, journalists, filmmakers, and someone who really makes sense of the world around us as we try to do here at Irrational Fear. Please welcome to the podcast, Jon Ronson. Welcome.
Hey, Dan, thank you for having me, and thank you for all those nice things you just said.
You're fresh off Q&A, which is a real institution here in Australia. I'm not sure if you've been in anything. I mean, you probably have been on stuff like it. How was your experience on Q&A?
Well, it was good. I do tend to avoid doing shows like that because in Britain, where I lived until 12 years ago, the British equivalent of Q&A is this show called Question Time. And it's an adversarial bear pit. Like, Britain is so fucked, that all they can think of to do, and like so many different types of media, is create like oppositional adversarial journalism. And I think, and I'm always very like resistant to that, because it's like if you're being interviewed and somebody's like shouting at you, then all you learn about that person is how they respond to being shouted at. And I'll tell you who I respond to being shouted at. Badly. I stammer and I clam up, but I'm not sure that says anything interesting about me. So anyway, that's a big caveat to say that all of that meant I was sort of a little worried to do Q&A, because I thought would it be similar to Question Time?
Well, but usually it is. Usually it's quite combative. So maybe they're just all enamored that you were on Q&A and they were on their best behaviour.
Well, I thought it was lovely. There was people on the panel with very different political opinions.
We need to clip that up and put that to the ABC. I thought Q&A was lovely, Jon Ronson.
I was very worried, and I've actually turned down Q&A in the past for the reasons that I said, because I just don't think it's my, it's sort of where it's the type of place where I thrive. I can be like a rabbit in the headlights. Whereas more long form stuff like this is, where I feel comfortable. So actually, I did it in 2011, and Slavo Zizek yelled at me. So that's a bad memory. That was at the Sydney Opera House, and then I've turned it down once or twice subsequently. And then I did it last night, and I thought it was a really nice. I liked everyone on the panel.
I would enjoy reading a 500-page book from Jon Ronson, unpacking the trauma from Q&A. That would be...
Being yelled at by Zizek.
Yeah.
If you struggle in the world of adversarial, combative, environments, you live in the States now. How's your just cortisol levels?
Yeah, well, John, I get the question is like, is everyone okay?
Like on the street, like I'm a good person to ask this question to, because in my daily life, I live in a village in upstate New York, which is really split down the middle. It's slightly more Democrats than Trumpers, but it's basically split. And on a day-to-day basis, other than people's property taxes going up because of gentrification, which is definitely an issue, in general, people just get on well with each other. We all meet at the local hotel and we have drinks and everyone's nice. And if a dog, escapes, everybody's running up the road together trying to rescue the dog. It's only when we get onto social media and we're being prodded at by, monstrous billionaires like Elon Musk that everybody gets angry with each other. In real life, everybody gets on pretty well.
I heard you talk about the dog escaping on another podcast recently.
Well, it's a good example, because I was at home watching Mission Impossible, and there was like a bang on my door and a dog had escaped. So I kind of joined everybody running up the avenue and we got the dog.
Did you dare to log on to social media to find out what the local Facebook groups were saying about the dog? I've recently moved to a regional area outside of Sydney, and I live for my local Facebook group. The gossip that goes through that group is just incredible.
No, it is a gossipy village. I realised that pretty soon after we lived there. In fact, us moving created a little bit of gossip, and a couple of the neighbours were a little hostile, just very in a sort of a gently passive-aggressive way. And I just sort of thought to myself, you know what? I go to Ku Klux Klan meetings. Like, I hang out with Nazis. I'm not going to be intimidated or in any way emotionally upset by some local gossip in the village. So I just felt completely immune to it. I get on with my life, and the people and the gossips can gossip, and it's all fine.
Yeah. You are in Australia because you're touring your Psychopath show, Psychopath Night, and that's loosely based on your 2011 book, The Psychopath Test. Does it surprise you, people's appetite for you to be on stage talking about psychopaths for 10 years? Does it kind of interest you?
Well, I'm always surprised that anybody wants to come to any of my shows. Even I spend, 95% of my life alone in a room writing. I always forget that anyone's interested. So yes, but I have noticed people think I'm being disingenuous when I say this, but I swear this is the truth. Everything I do is really hard to explain to people. Like I've spent my life having to say, look, you made think you don't want to read The Men Who Stare at Goats or, Say You've Been Publicly Shamed or Them. This may sound like topics that you have no interest in, but honestly, if you give it a try, you'll like it. It's a good book. The Psychopath Test is the only time I've ever written a book where I didn't have to convince anyone to read
Right.
it. Turns out if you put the word psychopath in the title of a book, people will buy it.
Why do you think that is? What is the enduring interest in psychopaths?
I think it is one of the most mysterious mental disorders, probably the most mysterious mental disorder, because it's the idea, and I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with this, but the way...
I mean, you wouldn't. You're a psychopath, so there's no way.
Well, the way it was first described to me by somebody is like they look human, they act human, you can be with one for years before you know that anything's wrong, but they're actually more like predatory animals than human.
Wow.
And that's a prevalent thought, like among clinicians who work with psychopaths, people who've been married to psychopaths. And for a humanist like me, who thinks that everybody's a complicated mix of positive and negative characteristics, that was a really kind of challenging thing to be told. And I think that's one of the reasons why psychopathy is so interesting to people, because it's a mysterious, it's this idea that, all the emotions are just skin deep and there's nothing going on underneath the surface. It's like, it's almost, it's so uncanny, there's an uncanniness to it that I think really intrigues people.
People are obviously tossing the word around a lot. A lot of people are not just on TikTok about like ex-boyfriends, but I mean, politics at the moment, there's a lot of people calling, is Trump a psychopath? Does he have a narcissistic personality disorder? All those sorts of things. As someone who's spent a lot of time in that world, have you done some out-of-the-pocket diagnoses of your new president?
Well, my book is to a great extent, and the stage show as well, is to a great extent a kind of cautionary tale to not armchair diagnose people, because becoming a psychopath can turn you into a bit of a psychopath in our way to define people by their maddest edges. However, saying all of that, Trump has been in our lives now since 2015, and I do think the amount of information we have about Trump now is a hell of a lot more than the kind of information that clinicians go on to decide whether or not somebody's a psychopath. So it's not invalid to ask those questions, even though there is something, troublesome about armchair diagnoses. I think it's not invalid to ask those questions about Trump. And I think my answer is, I think I can answer that question with a question of my own, which is, do you think Trump has a whole load of emotions going on under the surface, this kind of volcano of emotions, and he can't handle them, so he lashes out because he's too emotional? Or do you think that what's going on underneath the surface with Trump is nothing? And if the answer is B, then he's a psychopath, and if the answer is A, he's a narcissist.
Well, I'm circling A. The man is.
Well, it feels like A is such a slam dunk, doesn't it? Yeah.
It feels like that to me. Yeah. And so in a way that makes psychopathy more interesting than narcissism in some ways, because narcissists are more kind of explicable. We all know what it's like to have emotions that we find painful, and so we suppress them. So I think regular humans are probably more akin to narcissists than to psychopaths. And I think that's why psychopaths are so intriguing to people.
There's a saying about politics and politicians that politicians only respond to pain, and whenever they're talking about the electorate. And it seems to me that the pain associated with Trump is very much his ego. So if you can attack his ego, then he's responding to that pain.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Trump probably does have a narcissistic disorder. I think it's kind of seems pretty much a slam dunk. That thing about psychopaths and the uncanniness, it's funny. I was just thinking, I was talking to my son on the phone last night. I was on my way to the ABC to do Q&A, and I talked to my son, and my son was like, I've never been to Australia. Describe it. What's Australia like? And I said, look, I was walking through the botanical gardens in Melbourne yesterday, There's so much about Melbourne and Sydney too that feels very familiar. Like in many ways, it feels like a British city. But then there's the odd thing that is like completely like you've never seen before. So like the magpies, for instance, are nothing like magpies you see in Britain or America or whatever. So that's kind of like psychopathy. It's like in a lot of ways they seem just like us, but then there's the odd thing that's nothing like us. Also, is it true that like common birds in Australia routinely attack people?
Well, magpies, definitely.
It's the magpies, right? Because I was walking through the botanical gardens yesterday and this woman was walking towards me and she got attacked by two birds. And she just like, but I don't think they were magpies. They were a different type of common bird that I didn't recognize at all. And she like looked as if, oh, you know, getting attacked by birds again. And I was like, that's unusual. Like I never get attacked in America.
Yeah. This is just what happens when you live in Australia, John. You just have to be prepared to be attacked by a bird. It's just what happens.
John, one of the books that I think maybe one of the first ones that the gateway to your world for me was So You've Been Publicly Shamed, which was sort of 2015, book about internet shaming. It was so of it, like it felt like the moment when that book came out. I was like, oh yes. But so much has changed in the world of shaming and the internet, and particularly Twitter, which was like a big part of the internet shaming over the last 10 years. Not just the owner, but everything. And I think the shame and shamelessness has been so interesting, particularly in world leaders like Trump.
Oh, yeah.
And in a local example as well, you know, Senator Babbitt Lewis tweeted over the last couple of weeks. He tweeted the N-word, he tweeted some other slurs, and only after a censure from the Senate, where they're going to revoke his privileges as a senator, did he remove those tweets because he was just shameless. He's like, we live in another world. I can say the N-word on Twitter and no one can cancel me.
Yes,
you wrote the book on it. It seems like maybe the over-shaming created this pendulum swing back to shamelessness. Is that your sort of assessment of it?
Very much so, yeah. I equate it to like hospital superbugs becoming impervious. these transgressors who are unshameable, and it's partly our fault for overusing shame as a weapon. Yeah, I absolutely see that. There's many examples of it. And I think it's good if it's somebody who's being disproportionately punished for some minor transgression. I think refusing to be ashamed is a positive thing. But obviously what's happening now is that lots of people who ought to feel some shame are refusing to feel ashamed. And that's a problem. I mean, just look at Russell Brand. You know, somebody who, if he doesn't get arrested, he is going to be completely impervious to any criticism. He's just moved to X and Rumble. And, you know, the only censure that Russell Brand can have is arrest. So that's a sort of modern example of it. So, yeah, I think it's partly our fault for overusing shaming as a weapon, but also it's created a world that we don't want. I think people thought when I wrote that book that I would be sort of, you know, ideologically opposed to shaming. But I'm not. I'm ideologically opposed to disproportionately shaming private individuals who haven't done anything wrong.
Yeah, my theory is that we should bring back the stocks. I think that's the only kind of like but just you don't need to put people in prison, but like someone should go to, if you've done something that's shameable, we don't lock you up. We just put you in the stocks. We hurl some fruit at you for an hour and then you're out. And a little bit of like forced shaming.
Right. Well, you know what? When I was writing So You've Been Publicly Shamed, I went to Boston and went to like the old libraries to look at the sort of earliest records of American life. And I found, because I assumed what you'd probably assume, which is that the reason why the stocks and other public punishments fell out of favor was that they lost their power because you just, you know, somebody who'd been in the stocks could just move to a different part of the city and it would be fine. But no, it turns out the reason why the stocks and other public punishments fell out of favor was because they were considered too brutal. I was finding these records of like public whippings where the woman being whipped was saying, look, whip me, that's fine, but please whip me in private. So when we began to use public shaming on social media, we were bringing back a weapon that was stopped in the 19th century for being too brutal.
Yikes.
Oh my gosh. John, what is something in your deep, dark past that you're worried about escaping, into the general public? What is something that you're personally ashamed of that you're worried, more people might know about?
Well, if I think, I've led because I'm an anxious person, my anxiety has kept me from doing anything too bad. This is why I've always thought that psychopathy must be the most pleasant feeling of all the mental disorders, because they don't have any anxiety, they don't have any guilt, they don't have any remorse. All the things that keep us moral are painful feelings that psychopaths don't have. So it is a good feeling. Like when Me Too broke,
yeah,
I didn't break a sweat. I thought, I'm not going to be Me Too. And that was a good feeling.
As someone who lost their virginity in the late 20s, I was like, yeah, that's this is fine. This is fine. There's nothing in my past.
Yeah. So that was a good feeling. But the other thing, going back to what you were saying about how shame has changed, now the shamers tend to be people on the right. When So You've Been Publicly Shamed came out, I like to think of that book as being like non-political, against shaming whoever was doing it. But most of the people who were overutilizing shame were people coming from the left. That's completely changed. I mean, I can say very few positive things about Elon Musk, but one positive thing is that idea of plucking somebody out of obscurity on Twitter and then, making them the main character and ruining their life, that doesn't really happen anymore, on the left, certainly. But now the right, who are the ones who are always railing against cancel culture, give them the power and they fucking do it constantly. Like they're the main aggressors now. Just look at things like libs of TikTok. They'll pluck some random gay teacher from some small American town out for mockery and ridicule. And then the next thing you know, that teacher's school's getting bomb threats. And that's happening over and over and over again. And the right are still going on about left-wing cancel culture. No, you're the aggressors now.
It's totally wild. Like the right in this country are perfectionists at that hypocrisy.
Right.
They will the Australian, the News Corp media, Sky News. They're quite willing to pick very easy targets and ridicule them for weeks on end. But they're also the ones that are also publishing, oh no, cancel culture's gone too far. The woke agenda's, trying to silence me in my newspaper and my radio column and everything else that I've got. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I find it kind of maddening. And I've been criticized by people on the right. It's like, oh, you're such a hypocrite. You were against the left publicly shaming people and now you're criticizing us. And I want to say, no, I've been consistent all of this time. I'm against public shaming, whoever's doing it. I'm against that kind of public shaming, whoever's doing it. And now the right are the aggressors. They can't bleat on about cancel culture anymore. They're the ones who are doing it.
Yeah. How was your experience over the last couple of months with the US election living in the United States? Are you in your bubble or are you kind of consumed by everything that's happening over there at the same time?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I was away because I've been on this Psychopath Night tour for 7 weeks. So I was actually in England when it happened. But my response to it, and I'm not saying that this is good, I'm actually saying this is probably bad, is that my response to it, I think, is probably similar to a lot of people's response, which was that instead of being like animated and engaged and subscribing to the New York Times and subscribing to all of these podcasts, I thought, I can't go through all of that again. I don't want to spend the next 4 years thinking about Trump every day. I'm going to disengage until something terrible, demonstrably terrible happens. I'm going to disengage. And that's, of course, what autocrats want. They want to, sort of get you into a place of submission. But
when you look at the Democratic vote, that seems to be what a lot of Democrats who voted last time also did. They were like, we're out of here.
Yeah. And it's bad. I'm not saying it's positive. I think it's negative. But the fact is, for a good week, I'm only just now actually starting to listen to The Daily again and Anderson Cooper again. I just couldn't bear it. I just thought, I don't want Trump in my head in the way that he was in my head for 4 years. And
I have a bunch of really good progressive friends that over that week, they went into the high Sierras and went hiking instead of spending time looking at the news. They were like, we got to get out of here. We got to leave.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. So I have disengaged in a way that will, suit autocrats.
I mean, you've lived through it before. I mean, I lived in America from 2016 to 2018, so I've kind of lived through that period as well. And the first time round, it was chaotic and you felt like you did have to watch everything. But I feel like now everything that was unprecedented is precedented, so you don't have to worry about it so much anymore. You just know some wild shit's going to happen over the next 4 years, and then maybe you can pick it up in 4 years' time.
And what you hope is that, when Trump really did try to destroy democracy around January the 20th and so on, the institutions held, democracy held. And so people thought, okay, well, maybe Trump isn't quite as frightening as we thought he was. And I think that's part of the reason why he won this time around, because people weren't quite as frightened of him this time because he wasn't as effective as people feared. But that doesn't mean he won't be effective this time. He may be.
Yeah, I think that maybe part of that for me, not that I live there, but some of that disengagement is like, well, he can't run again. Not that like obviously he can do a lot in 4 years. He did a lot in the last 4 years, particularly with judges and all those sorts of things, particularly with the Supreme Court. But there's a bit like, well, fuck. I think there's probably a feeling, I don't know if you have this feeling living there, that you're like, do you just look around going, who are you people that thought this was okay the second time? Like how where are you getting this?
Well, I don't want to think that. That's another reason why I think I'm going to, be different this time. Because during the first Trump presidency, every single night I watched CNN. I watched Anderson Cooper, Jake Tapper, Erin Burnett, and they were just. And I needed it. I needed to have my fears reflected back at me from smart people on television. And Anderson Cooper and Rachel Maddow and so on were very good at doing that. So I moved away from Rachel Maddow quite quickly because she was pretty nuts. But Anderson Cooper, I think, is kind of brilliant. And he was reflecting my fears back to me in a very eloquent, charming way. But it did mean that I then spent those 4 years constantly on high alert because Anderson Cooper was like scaring us every night. I joked that it was like kind of QAnon, but my Q was Anderson Cooper.
QAnon.
And at the end, when Trump almost got re-elected for the second, in 2020, I found myself feeling resentful of CNN. Because if you watch CNN for those 4 years, the message you got was that there's been a terrible mistake. Trump got in by some fluke. It was a terrible mistake. Everybody now knows it was a terrible mistake. But we were already being fed like half the information. And the fact is Trump nearly got elected the second time and now he's been elected again. So this time around, I want to understand, rather than demonize the Trumpers, the voters, I want to sort of understand them more. Do you get what I mean?
Well, I mean, classic
after
Ronson.
all, yeah, but also after all, there's quite a lot of them.
Yeah.
I resent the amount of time I spent worrying about Trump between 2016 and 2020. I might have written another book in the amount of time that I spent worrying about Trump.
Yeah. One of the things you've made recently, which I have loved on Car Road Trips, is Things Fell Apart, the podcast, where you kind of pull on little threads in the culture wars and find out where they lead. One in series 2, which I absolutely was gobsmacked by, was abortion. How did you find out that, the whole abortion issue was basically inflamed by two dudes that wanted to make films?
Yeah, I mean, extraordinary. I got to say, it's a good success story, how I found that story. So I wanted to do a show about the culture wars. And then I thought, well, I don't want to be part of the culture wars. So maybe an interesting way of doing it is to tell these origin stories, these history stories. And I always like kind of butterfly effect stories. Somebody makes a decision and the impacts are kind of, unanticipated. So I always love that as a kind of storytelling technique. So I was reading this book called War for the Soul of America, which is a pretty, comprehensive, quite straight history of the culture wars. And everybody in the book were people who you would expect: activists, Christian evangelists, preachers, politicians. And then there was this tiny little mention, this kind of passing mention of a hippie art historian called Francis Schaeffer, who lived in the Swiss Alps. And it was just those words: Swiss Alps, art historian, he like, you know, Eric Clapton would go and sit at his feet while he gave lectures on Christian art. And I thought, what's this guy doing in a book about where all the other characters in the book are politicians and so on? He seemed so dissonant. And so I went down a little rabbit hole about this, you know, hippie-like Christian art historian in the Swiss Alps. And then I discovered that this guy's son wanted to be a movie director. So he made these documentaries for his father where he convinced his father to do some anti-abortion stuff, which just wasn't an issue in Christian evangelism in the late 1970s at all. The only people who cared about abortion back then were Roman Catholics. But so I just found this whole story like unfolded in front of me just because I was curious of the words.
Swiss Alps.
Yes, Swiss Alps.
You're like, this could be a pretty good funded trip for me.
Finally, a tax deduction to Switzerland.
Yeah. So it turns out that this guy's son had ambitions to make movies for Hollywood. He wanted to get a show reel together to show producers. He scattered 1,000 dolls on the Dead Sea as a sort of, he had a personal bugbear about abortion because he was a father at 18 or whatever. But he just wanted like arresting visual images to impress Hollywood producers. But instead of impressing Hollywood producers, he impressed loads of Christian evangelists who then went on and murdered abortion doctors because his images were so arresting.
Just so wild, just so wild that this like act of ego, which has nothing to do with abortion really, but this guy trying to fulfill that little gap in his heart has caused so much grievance and pain in the world.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Incredible. And he is now very remorseful about it, the son. He tries to make amends by just yelling at people on Twitter, yelling at conservatives. So that's going to work.
That ought to do it.
Yeah.
Before we get to some questions from our Patreon, John, back on shaming, it's kind of Lewis and I, we dabble in satire on this podcast. We do kind of satirical sketches and stuff. And I think there was a time, I don't know about you, Lewis, but there was a time when I used to think, these jokes are going to change the world.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to admit there was a brief period I thought that too.
we were. That joke from Manhattan, the Woody Allen movie Manhattan, where they're saying, well, there was a brilliant New Yorker cartoon about the Nazis marching in Skokie, Chicago. Like a New Yorker cartoon's going to do any good.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of built like little movements around climate and stuff, and occasionally we kind of, get our audience to do stuff. And with that, sometimes changes a small part of the world. Like we got the Prime Minister to go to the Glasgow climate talks in 2021 when he previously wasn't. So that was good. But that took a lot of money and billboards to do. But we did that.
It also didn't improve Australia's climate change policies at all.
No, Australia is still the number 1 or 2 pariah when it comes to climate talks. But still, we made the Prime Minister buy a business class flight. So that's good. What are your thoughts on comedy and satire? Can comedy and satire change the world?
It probably can, yeah. I mean, historically, politics has always, favoured the right and culture has favoured the left, right? I mean, that's always panned out. Yeah, you say satire, but, if you think about just all culture, music, Chapel Road, I mean, Taylor Swift endorsement clearly isn't going to change a political outcome, but it will change the sort of hearts and minds of young kids and so on. Same as, Chapel Road and so on. So, yeah, I think it may not change political outcomes, but I think it will change what's going on inside people's inner lives, maybe. Yeah.
Well, we've got some questions from our Patreon supporters, John. This one, I can't remember who wrote this, but they said, if your child is showing psychopathic tendencies, our society is set to so psychopaths thrive. Should we be indulging our children's psychopathic tendencies?
No, don't indulge them. But at the same time, there's definitely a sort of move towards people saying, well, surely there's positive things about psychopathy. They make good surgeons, they make, good sharpshooters and so on. But my view...
And there's a lot of people on the left who are tweeting, hey, let's not marginalise psychopaths.
There is a little bit of that going on. There is, actually, which is quite new, actually. There's a big move to destigmatise all mental health disorders. So that includes psychopathy. And in fact, there's an Australian TikTok influencer called Kanika, who I believe was like Miss Universe once, or certainly Miss Australia or something. Anyway, she's also a diagnosed sociopath TikTok influencer. And people,
yes.
Yeah, and people love her. So yeah, there is a move to destigmatize it. But I think the truth is, if you've got no empathy, if you're manipulative, remorseless, impulsive, grandiose, irresponsible, those are all items on the psychopath checklist. Those aren't traits that I think we should be encouraging as a society.
Wise words. Ashley Burns says, I'd be interested to know how psychopaths interact with each other. Do you have any idea of how psychopaths interact with each other, John?
There have been stories of two psychopaths getting together and going on a killing spree. That has happened.
Oh, I thought you were going to say going on a Tinder date. And I'm like, well, that's interesting.
I think that too. Think about the movie. That Terrence Malick movie, Badlands, with Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek. That's a good fictional example of two psychopaths going on the road together and kind of enjoying each other's company and, going on a killing spree together. And I think there's been some real life examples of a male and a female psychopath doing that. But generally speaking, I think psychopaths are just very sort of self-centered. They don't love. They're not capable of love. So I don't think, bonds could really form with psychopaths and anyone. One of the reasons why some psychopaths decide to stop being malevolent and try and be kind of better people is because of the sort of loneliness of being a psychopath. You can't love, you can't form emotional bonds with people.
And also, if you're a psychopath, there's no one to bully. They're all avoiding you.
Yeah. So I've had a couple of people say to me over the years that they're psychopaths and they're sick of the loneliness and they're sick of spreading malevolence. Wow. And they want to be more kind of useful members of society. Yeah, I've heard that a couple of times over the years.
But do you think that's just them being manipulative to lure you in?
I've had people say that to me maybe 3 or 4 times, like after talks and stuff like that. And I've got to say, on every occasion, my all you can go on is your instinct, right? And on every occasion, my instinct was that they were being genuine.
Sure, right.
Yeah. Like I obviously have no idea because I've just got their word to go on, but I believed them every time they said it.
Dim Simple asks, what did you think of Alex Jones when you both snuck into Bohemian Grove? I don't know the story. What's this?
Oh, this is iconic.
Yeah.
This is the Jon Ronson origin story.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Yeah.
I must have missed it.
Fuck, no. Oh my God. This is a crazy story. So I heard this rumor that there was a secret campsite, like a posh campsite, sort of secret club in the forests of Northern California called Bohemian Grove, where world leaders meet. It's all men and it's mainly Republican, it's right-leaning, and they all meet and they have these talks and they all get drunk and they all stay in these tents, these very posh tents. But on the Saturday night, they have a ritual which culminates in a papier-mâché effigy being thrown into a bonfire in front of a giant stone owl. So that's what I heard. So I thought, well, that can't be true. Then I thought, well, I've got to get in. I've got to somehow get in with this. But then I thought, well, I don't want to do that alone, partly for reasons of fear, but also partly because I was sensible enough to know that if I failed to get into Bohemian Grove, I'd have no story. But if I failed to get into Bohemian Grove with somebody else, there's still possibly a story there. So I phoned up David Icke and I said, I'm thinking about sneaking into Bohemian Grove. Do you want to come? And he said, no, that's where they transform themselves back into giant reptiles. People vanish in those forests. Stay away. So then I phoned up Alex Jones, who I'd met. He was a completely unknown. He was only famous in militia and Texas hipster circles.
What year was this? What year were we talking?
It was about 1998.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I only knew Alex Jones from after September 11, but that's amazing.
Yeah. No, I sometimes think of like the story I'm about to tell you as being like Alex Jones's Revolver, and then 9/11 was Alex Jones's Sergeant Pepper's.
Wow.
So it's like I was the kind of story. So basically I phoned up Alex Jones and I said, I'm thinking about sneaking into Bohemian Grove. Do you want to come? And he said, yes, we'll get a camera and we'll hide it and we'll sneak in and we'll confront those globalist Satanists going about their satanic evil. And I said, I think stealth might be a better approach. Yeah, you're right, stealth. So to cut a long story short, the long story is all in my book, Them. I met Alex and we tried to figure out how to sneak into Bohemian Grove. And we met a local lawyer from the town who had himself snuck into Bohemian Grove. And he said, what you need to do is dress preppy, put on some preppy, go to like the local preppy clothes store, and then just walk up the drive, giving the security guard a kind of I rule the world wave.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did. But Alex, at the last minute, got cold feet and thought that maybe I was part of like a kind of Wicker Man type plot to lure him into the forest.
Oh my gosh.
And he would be the one sacrificed in front of the giant stone owl. So Alex decided, just to be on the safe side, to sneak in through the undergrowth.
Oh.
Alex and his producer Mike Hansen snuck in through the undergrowth. Me and the lawyer Rick walked up the drive, but we all got in. And we secretly filmed this ritual where people like George Bush and Dick Cheney really did have a mock human sacrifice. And it's on YouTube. You can look up either Alex's version or my version. They're both on YouTube. But then what happened was that Alex, being Alex, that wasn't enough. You know, world leaders taking part in a mock human sacrifice, that wasn't enough. He had to add a layer of fiction to it. So he put out this video called Dark Secrets Inside Bohemian Grove, where he said we may have witnessed an actual human sacrifice.
Oh my gosh.
Which then put me in the position of having to basically defend the Bush family's right to have a mock human sacrifice, which is like a weird position to be in. So it set us both up. It was, for both of us, it was like our first big story, I suppose.
Oh my gosh. Are you still on talking terms with Alex Jones?
No. So what happened after that? So Alex didn't like, I went on C-SPAN at the time.
Yeah.
That Alex had lied about what we saw in Bohemian Grove, which is true. Alex had lied about it.
Yeah.
So Alex got annoyed with me for saying that on C-SPAN. And then we didn't talk for a couple of years. And then when The Many Stoic Goats came out, he had me on InfoWars and we talked about it. That was all fine. And then we lost touch for years, till 2016. And then I reconnected with him at the Republican convention in 2016. And we got on well. Like, on a personal level, the fact is that me and Alex had the greatest night of our lives together.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, what an amazing story.
Yeah, you're always going to have some residual, sort of warm feelings towards somebody who shared the most extraordinary night of your life.
Yeah.
However, then Alex became a lot more nefarious and started hounding the parents of children killed at Sandy Hook and so on. And people started criticizing me for telling this sort of silly slapstick story about, me and Alex sneaking into Bohemian Grove. My response to them was, look, Alex, when me and Alex snuck into Bohemian Grove, he was a different person. His concerns back then were things like Waco and Ruby Ridge and so on, and the Oklahoma City bombing.
Rightful concerns about real life conspiracies.
Yeah, about government overreach. And, so I didn't have that much of a problem with Alex back then, to be honest. I thought Waco was a disaster and Ruby Ridge was a disaster. I agreed with Alex about it. Like, I don't know. I doubt that the government deliberately set the fire at Waco, which is what Alex believes. I don't, I think that probably isn't true, but I don't know. But my point was that it's kind of postmodern to accuse me of being too easy on Alex when he hadn't done the bad things yet.
Yeah.
However, I did feel a bit guilty about it, and I felt there needed to be a little bit of karmic rebalancing. So I then did another story about Alex for This American Life about his teenage years. I found this amazing story about Alex's teenage years. And then Alex stopped talking to me again because he didn't like that story. And now me and Alex don't talk because he didn't like the American Life story. But just to circle back to the moment that I just thought was so funny. So Tony, we met this local lawyer called Rick who gave us advice on how to sneak into Bohemian Grove. And I just remember Alex had this plan that we'd rent a boat and sail along the river and then moor the boat and climb the mountain and get in that way.
Oh, there's sort of Genghis Khan approach.
Yeah. And the lawyer, Rick, said, if you go in that way, you're going to get yourself killed. And also, Rick's got out his notepad and wrote down, going in that way, killed. And, and it was... also, I said to Alex, have you got any like a contingency plan if they figure out, that you're there? Like, if your identity is uncovered, have you got like a plan? And he said, yeah, I do have a plan. And I said, what is it? And he said, I'm going to say to them, don't come any closer. Like,
that's not a plan.
Yeah, that's a threat. That's not a plan.
I'm going to really escalate the tensions of the situation. Yeah.
I said to Alex, that's not preppy talk. Don't come any closer is not preppy talk.
No,
don't come any closer. I've got a bag full of mushroom-infused coffee beans.
Yeah, but there was this great moment when Alex and his producer Mike practiced being preppy. We caught it on camera, then practiced being preppy so we could infiltrate Bohemian Grove together. So yeah, that's a potted history of me and Alex being entwined in each other's lives.
That's incredible. That is such an incredible story. Like it's so amazing. And also, like, it's funny. I don't know if it's the same for you, Lewis, but it's funny for me to hear you talk about this because we all consume the canon of so many culture makers like you and Louis and Adam Buxton and all these people of a certain peerage, and it's so funny to lump you with Alex Jones.
yeah, absolutely. But going back to the listener's question, like, what did I think of him? He's not the easiest person to be around because he's unbelievably tireless. He has an unbelievable amount of energy. And because he's quite narcissistic, I don't think he's very cognizant that other people don't have quite as much energy as he has. So he can be kind of exhausting to be around because he's just got so much more energy than most people have. So he's not the easiest person to be around for that reason. But I would compliment him on one or two things. I'd compliment him on the fact that he has unbelievable oratory skills. Like, I don't think people give him enough credit because he uses those oratory skills for bad so often, for telling lies and hounding people who don't deserve to be hounded and so on. I was always impressed by how good he is at what he does. But
it's such a common thing, though. I mean, obviously, I know that there's obviously the internet rule that everything comes back to Hitler, but I mean, that's one of his great skills. But it's, Trump has it. In Australia, we have a variety of shock jocks who are incredible broadcasters and terrible people. It is so often a hand-in-hand kind of pairing, those two things.
Yeah, I agree with you. But, Alex's use of words, when he goes off on a kind of stream of consciousness.
They're turning the frogs gay.
Yeah, it's pretty breathtaking. He did one the other day. The last contact I had with him, he didn't respond. But he did this really funny piss take of QAnon. And you can see it's there online somewhere, like Alex Jones attacks QAnon, and it was really funny. And also, it was in the right. He was taking a piss out of QAnon, and that was like a good thing. So I texted him to say something like, I know we've had our falling out, but I just wanted to say I thought in the spirit of positive reinforcement, I wanted to tell him how much I liked his monologue about QAnon, and he didn't get back to me.
No, we got two final questions from our Patreon supporters. Tim asks, does the Donald Trump second term make the entirety of So You've Been Publicly Shamed null and void?
Well, actually, there's a moment in So You've Been Publicly Shamed, which I think is very prescient, which is when Max Mosley, there's a chapter about this guy called Max Mosley, whose father was a fascist leader, Oswald Mosley, like Britain's fascist leader. But Max had a much better life. He became head of Formula One racing and got involved, had a sort of Ralph Nader type career, getting involved in car safety and that kind of thing. And then got done for a quote unquote, there was a headline in the News of the World that says, that Max Mosley was involved in a Nazi orgy. But it was a consensual orgy at an S&M club, which was definitely German army themed, but there was no Nazism involved. So
specific.
Anyway, this is a long way of saying that he said to me that he refused to be shamed by that.
Right.
He said a public shaming is a pact between a shamer and a shamee. And if the shamee steps out of the pact by refusing to feel ashamed, then the whole thing crumbles. And as we said earlier, I think that's true. And it's good if somebody doesn't deserve to be shamed. But it's then created this sort of generation of transgressors who can't be shamed.
It's interesting. We have a friend that's been on the podcast recently. She's going through some shaming for some jokes she made online, and the jokes are perfectly fine. And I gave her a call just to say, hey, you know what? You don't have to be ashamed by this. You know, it's actually a choice. Like you can kind of combat this with a joke and move on from it because you're a comedian. And it was kind of like a revelation. It's just like, oh yeah, I haven't actually thought about attacking this from a comedy perspective. Of course I should do that.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And so, you know, I suppose that's why I said, you know, that there's chapters in the book and in all of my books, actually, the Psychopath Test and them, that sort of speak to Trump's origin in a way without ever really mentioning Trump by name. They kind of speak to it all.
Final question from Harrison. He asks, if you wrote an episode of Black Mirror, what would it be about?
Well, I sort of did write an episode of Black Mirror because Hated in the Nation, which is one of the episodes of Black Mirror, which is like a cop procedural drama, but it's actually about Twitter shaming, was inspired by So You've Been Publicly Shamed.
Huh.
Yeah, Charlie Brooker. I didn't get any money for it, but I did get praise by Charlie Brooker for it. So Hated in the Nation is the answer because I practically did write that episode because it was inspired by my book.
You should definitely hit him up for a Streamberry polo fleece or something like that. He's got those made. Netflix are making those Streamberry jackets, so you should get one off him.
Yeah, I definitely should.
Jon, that's right. Netflix just don't have any money. Sorry, they've given it all to Jake Paul.
Such an entertainer, Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. Jon, thank you so much. You're touring around Australia with the Psychopath Night. I'll be seeing you on Thursday night in Sydney, so I'm looking forward to that. Big thank you for coming on Irrational Fear. Really appreciate it.
That was a joy. Thank you. It was really nice to talk to you both, Lewis and Dan, and thank you.
Big thanks to all of our Patreon supporters who chimed in with questions. Big thanks to Rode Mics, and big thanks to Jacob Brown on the Teppanyaki timeline. Until next week, there's always something to be scared of. Goodbye.